Elias Turner had lived on the same stretch of dusty land for so many years that he could no longer remember what it felt like to wake up to the sound of another human voice. His farm sat miles away from the nearest town, surrounded only by dry hills, silent mornings, and wide skies that changed color with every hour. Most people in the Arizona Territory thought a man living alone out here must be unusual, but to Elias, solitude had become something like a habit he never meant to form. He had once dreamed of a big family, noisy children, and warm evenings filled with laughter. But life had taken different turns. A long sickness years ago had taken away the small family he had hoped to build, leaving him with memories he kept folded away like old letters. After that, he stayed on his land, working every day, finding comfort in routine. He fixed fences, fed animals, planted crops, and repaired tools. The work kept his mind steady, and the passing days blended into one another like soft brush strokes on a faded painting. Elias was not unfriendly. He simply had no one nearby to talk to. The nearest neighbor was almost a day's ride away, and the nearest town took even longer to reach. Sometimes, weeks went by without seeing another face. The silence was so deep that even the wind seemed to whisper softly across the fields, as if afraid to disturb him. Still, Elias never complained. He felt he owed his land a kind of loyalty. It had supported him through loss, through long seasons of little rain, and through lonely winters that tested a man's patience. The land might have been harsh at times, but it was honest, something people were not always. Every morning, Elias woke before sunrise, made a small breakfast, and walked outside to watch the sky shift from gray to gold. He liked the way the sunlight crept over the ground, touching the wooden beams of his house and turning the fields warm. He took care of chores, checked the animals, and repaired whatever needed fixing. He carried conversations only in his thoughts, speaking aloud rarely, except to calm a nervous horse or encourage a stubborn mule. That year, however, there was something different in the air. It began with rumors carried by travelers who passed near his farm or stopped for water. They spoke of tension in the territory, of groups being moved from their lands, of families divided, and communities forced to relocate. Elias heard these things with a heavy heart. He did not believe conflict solved anything, and he often wondered what happened to the people caught in the middle of decisions made by others. But he avoided discussing such matters. He felt he had no right to speak about situations he did not fully understand. Instead, he continued tending his land and hoped the unrest would calm on its own. The only time Elias visited town was when he ran out of supplies. He would make a list, prepare his wagon, and travel slowly across the dry paths until the first signs of buildings appeared. The town was small, just a few wooden structures, a general store, a blacksmith shop, a small inn, and a handful of houses. People there recognized Elias, though he wasn't someone who joined conversations easily. They respected him as a hard-working man but viewed him as a quiet figure who preferred distance. On one such trip, the day started like any other. The sun was warm, the sky clear, and Elias planned to buy flour, tools, seeds, and a few essentials before returning home. But as he entered the town, he sensed something strange in the air. People gathered in small groups, whispering with expressions that mixed curiosity and unease. This was uncommon. As the town rarely had any excitement, Elias stopped near the general store and listened without meaning to. The words he heard were soft but heavy. Someone mentioned an Apache group being moved from nearby land, and how during that relocation, a young woman had somehow been separated from her people. Another person spoke about how some men had brought her to town, unsure what to do. Their voices were filled not with kindness but with judgment and misunderstanding. Elias didn't know the details, but he felt a sense of discomfort. He believed everyone deserved dignity and safety. The idea of someone being left behind, frightened and alone, stirred something inside him, something he had not felt in years. Perhaps it was memory, or compassion, or simply the loneliness in his own heart, recognizing the loneliness in another. He finished his errands quietly, keeping to himself. But curiosity pulled him toward the area behind the old inn, where a small crowd had formed. Elias didn't like crowds. Yet he walked closer, telling himself he only wanted to understand what was happening. When he reached the back of the group, he saw a young woman sitting on the ground, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore traditional Apache clothing, though it looked worn from travel. Her long black hair fell over her shoulders, and her eyes, though tired, carried strength. But there was also confusion in her expression, as if she could not understand why she was there or what would happen next. Elias felt a sharp tug in his chest. She reminded him of how people looked when life pushed them into situations they had never asked for. Some men stood nearby discussing her fate in careless tones. They were not cruel in action, but their words lacked empathy. They spoke as if she had no say in her own life, as if she were something to be decided on by others. Elias did not like the way they spoke. He stepped back, unsure if he should involve himself. After all, he was only a farmer who lived far from trouble. But as he looked at the woman, something shifted inside him. Loneliness had taught him how painful it was to be without support. He remembered the years he had spent with no one to speak to, no one to share meals with, no one to lean on. And although his loneliness was a quiet, personal struggle, it was nothing compared to being taken from one's home and separated from one's community. Elias returned to his wagon, telling himself he had no place in the matter, but he could not shake the thought of her sitting there, confused and surrounded by strangers. He finished loading his supplies, but instead of leaving town, he found himself walking back toward the crowd again, guided more by instinct than reason. He told himself he only wanted to make sure she was treated fairly. He had no plan, no clear idea of what he could do. But something in his heart urged him to stay near. There were moments in life, Elias believed, where a person had to act not because it was convenient, but because it was right. And as he watched the young woman lower her eyes in quiet fear, he knew this was one of those moments. The sun dipped lower in the sky, stretching long shadows across the dusty ground. Elias stood there longer than he intended, knowing that whatever happened next might change the rhythm of his quiet life forever. And for the first time in many years, he felt that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to live alone anymore. Elias Turner did not sleep well that night. Even after leaving the town and returning to his farm, the image of the young Apache woman stayed in his mind. Her quiet posture, the uncertainty in her eyes, and the way she seemed completely alone among strangers, none of it would leave him. Elias had seen loneliness before, but hers felt deeper, heavier, as if the world around her had suddenly shifted in a way no person should ever experience. He tried to distract himself by unpacking the supplies and preparing dinner, but everything he did felt slow. He kept pausing, imagining what might happen to her next. He reminded himself that interfering in other people's decisions was not something he usually did. He was not a man who liked to challenge others, nor was he someone who sought attention or played the hero in any story. Yet something about her situation touched a place inside him that had been quiet for a long time. The next morning, Elias found himself harnessing his horse again. He told himself he simply needed more seed and maybe some oil for his tools. Though he knew he didn't truly need anything, he just felt drawn to the town, as if he had left a question behind that needed answering. When he reached the town, the atmosphere was different from the day before. Fewer people stood around, and the usual calm had returned. But near the old inn, he noticed a small gathering once again. His steps slowed. Something inside him already knew who they were gathered around. As he walked closer, he saw the same men from before talking in low tones. The Apache woman stood a short distance away, her hands loosely clasped. She looked tired, though she held herself with quiet strength. Elias felt a familiar tug in his chest, like a reminder of something he had once promised himself to never look away when another person needed help. A man from the group saw Elias approaching and called out to him casually, as if this were all normal. He explained that they were considering letting someone take responsibility for the woman since she could not stay in town without a place to live. They spoke of her situation in practical terms, as if she were simply another task that needed settling. Elias listened politely, though his heart tightened at the tone. He looked at the woman again. She stood calmly, her eyes lowered, though she glanced up for a moment when she noticed Elias watching her. Her expression held both uncertainty and a small spark of hope, as if she recognized someone who wasn't speaking about her, but genuinely seeing her. The men explained they didn't have the means to provide her shelter or safety. They spoke as if someone needed to take her in before she became a burden to the town. Elias understood their practical concerns. Resources were limited, and the town was small, but he couldn't ignore how uncomfortable the situation felt. One of the men joked lightly that Elias lived alone and could use company out on his farm. The others laughed in an easy, careless way that made Elias shift his stance. He didn't appreciate the tone, nor the implication, but he stayed calm. He looked at the woman again and felt something settle inside him, a decision forming quietly and firmly. He asked the men what they intended to do if no one came forward for her. The answer was vague, uncertain. They didn't seem to have a real plan, only the hope that someone would take the responsibility off their hands. The woman, meanwhile, stood silently, observing everything without speaking. Elias could only imagine how frightening it must be to not understand what your future held, surrounded by people you didn't know. Elias took a slow breath. He didn't rush his decision. He thought about his quiet farm, the empty rooms, the long days without anyone to speak to. He thought about how wrong it felt to leave someone in such a fragile moment of life with no clear path ahead. And then, with a calm voice, he offered to take her home with him, not as something owned, not as someone under his control, but as a person who needed a safe place until she could decide her own future. The men looked surprised but relieved. They accepted his offer easily, handing over the small amounts they had collected from others to cover her stay and the trouble they believed they had gone through. Elias paid without complaint, not because he agreed with how they viewed the situation, but because he knew taking her away from their uncertainty was the right choice. When the men stepped back, Elias approached the woman slowly. He didn't want to frighten her. He spoke in a gentle tone, introducing himself and explaining that she could stay at his farm temporarily. He promised she would have her own space, her own choices, and her own freedom. He told her she did not owe him anything, and that he only wished to help. She listened quietly. Though she did not understand every word, she sensed his sincerity. Her eyes softened, and she nodded once. A small gesture that held deep meaning. Together, they walked toward his wagon. Elias helped her climb aboard carefully, making sure she felt safe. As they began the journey back to his farm, the path felt strangely different from usual. The sun was warm, the road quiet. But there was a new energy around him, one that came from having another person beside him for the first time in years. He didn't speak much at first, giving her space to settle. She sat quietly, looking around at the landscape with a mixture of curiosity and calm. After a while, Elias began speaking softly about the land, the way the seasons changed, how the fields looked different at sunrise. He kept his words simple, not knowing how much she could understand. Though she didn't reply, she listened, occasionally glancing at him with thoughtful eyes. When they reached the farm, Elias helped her step down from the wagon. She looked around slowly, taking in the open land, the wooden house, the small barn, and the quiet sky. Elias could tell she was trying to understand this new place, this new turn in her life. He showed her the small extra room in his house where she could stay. It was simple but clean: a bed, a window, a small table. He told her she was free to use everything and move as she wished. She stood in the doorway for a moment, then offered him a soft nod of gratitude. Elias made a warm meal and placed some food before her. She ate slowly, cautiously at first, then with more ease as she realized he meant her no harm. Elias ate across from her, keeping his movements calm so she felt comfortable. That night, after she went to rest in her room, Elias stepped outside and looked up at the stars. His farm felt different now, filled with a presence that was gentle yet strong. He wondered what changes might come, but he did not worry. For the first time in a long while, the silence around him didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful, like something new had begun quietly. The next morning, the first light of dawn touched the land, and Elias found her standing near the doorway, watching the sunrise. She looked calmer than before, as if the farm already offered her a small sense of safety. Elias greeted her softly, and she nodded in reply. Though they didn't share the same language fully, They shared something deeper, two people who had both known what it meant to be alone, now standing at the beginning of something uncertain but hopeful. The quiet bond between them had begun, shaped not by words, but by kindness and trust, two things both had been missing for far too long. The days that followed were quiet but different from any days Elias Turner had lived through in many years. The presence of the young Apache woman, Nalin, changed the rhythm of the farm in a way he did not expect. She did not speak much, yet her silence did not feel heavy or uncomfortable. It was simply part of who she was, and Elias respected that. During the first few mornings, Elias noticed that she woke very early, sometimes even before the sun rose fully. He would often find her standing outside near the small patch of dry earth beside the house, looking toward the hills as if listening to something far away. She stood still, peaceful, and thoughtful, like someone trying to connect with memories or voices from her past. Elias never interrupted her. He understood people needed their own private moments. He continued with his daily chores as usual, feeding the horse, checking the barn, pulling water from the well. But now, instead of silence following him everywhere, he would sometimes see Nalin watching from a distance with curious eyes. Other times, she quietly walked closer, observing how he worked. He could tell she wanted to understand this new place she had come to. One morning, as he carried a bucket toward the animals, he noticed her taking a few steps forward. She gently raised her hand and pointed to the bucket, then to herself, as if asking if she could help. Elias nodded with a warm smile. He handed her a smaller bucket, lighter and easier to carry. She accepted it with a soft nod and walked beside him. It was a simple moment, yet it felt meaningful. It was the first time she joined him in his work. She moved calmly, almost gracefully, as though she had done similar tasks before, but in a different life, a different place. When she fed the animals, they reacted gently to her presence, as if sensing a calm energy around her. Elias noticed this, and felt a quiet admiration. Though they shared few words, they began communicating through gestures, glances, and small actions. Elias learned that Nalin understood far more than she let on. She listened carefully whenever he spoke, even if she didn't respond. Sometimes she repeated words softly, practicing them with patience. Over time, she began picking up simple English phrases, enough to share small thoughts or ask basic questions. One afternoon, Elias was repairing a wooden fence when he noticed Nalin kneeling a short distance away. She was drawing shapes in the dirt, using a small branch. Her movements were slow and thoughtful. Curious, he walked closer and saw she was sketching patterns that looked like parts of a story. Mountains, circles, lines that connected like paths. When she noticed him watching, she looked a little uncertain, as if unsure whether he understood or whether she should erase it. Elias knelt beside her and shook his head gently, encouraging her to continue. She relaxed a little. Then, pointing to one of the shapes, something that looked like a curved line with a cluster of dots, she said a single word in her language. Her voice was soft, steady. He didn't understand the word, but he could feel its meaning was important. She repeated it, then touched her chest lightly, as if it was something connected to her heart or her people. Elias nodded respectfully, wishing he could say something meaningful in return. Instead, he listened with patience, and she seemed grateful for that. As the days turned into weeks, trust began to build between them quietly, like a plant growing in soft soil. There were no sudden moments, no dramatic changes, just small steps made with honesty. Elias noticed how she relaxed more inside the house, how she moved with familiarity around the farm, and how she began humming soft tunes in the evenings. Her voice was low but warm, carrying melodies that seemed older than both of them. Sometimes, when the nights were cool, they sat outside near a small fire Elias made to keep the air warm. The sky above them was wide and full of stars. Nalin often looked up for long periods, her eyes searching the sky as if she knew every star by name. Elias didn't disturb her. He simply enjoyed the quiet company, which felt more comforting than any words could express. One evening, as they sat outside, Nalin gently pointed toward a bright star. She said something in her language and then looked at Elias. She repeated the words slowly, inviting him to say it as well. He tried his best, though his pronunciation was not perfect. She smiled softly, a small but genuine smile. It was the first time he had seen her express happiness so openly. The moment warmed him more than the fire beside them. Little by little, they began sharing parts of their daily lives. Nalin taught Elias things she knew from her upbringing: how to find signs of changing weather by watching the movement of birds, how to read the patterns of wind on sand, how to tell when plants needed water, simply by touching the soil. She never taught these things directly. She showed them quietly, through small demonstrations. Elias learned quickly because he watched her with full attention. He admired her deep connection to nature, something he had never seen so clearly before. In return, Elias taught her things about the farm: how to plant seeds in straight rows, how to fix a loose hinge on a door, how to use simple tools. He did not rush her. He explained everything slowly, using gestures when needed. Whenever she succeeded at a task, even a small one, he encouraged her with a nod or a gentle smile. She responded with the same calm appreciation. As the bond grew stronger, the farm began to feel alive again. Elias found himself waking earlier, eager to start the day, knowing he would no longer be alone in his work. The meals they shared felt different too. They sat across from each other, eating quietly but comfortably. Sometimes, Nalin carefully tried to say a new English word she had learned, and Elias would help her pronounce it more clearly. Other times, she would say a word in her language, letting him repeat it until she nodded with approval. These small lessons became part of their routine, building a bridge between them. Still, there were days when Nalin seemed distant, lost in thought. Elias understood that she carried memories he could not see, and emotions he could not fully understand. On such days, he gave her space, allowing her to walk along the edge of the fields or sit beneath the shade of the lone tree near the house. She needed time to process everything she had gone through, and Elias respected her privacy deeply. One morning, when the sun was warm and the wind gentle, Elias found Nalin standing near the fence, looking out toward the distant hills. She seemed calm, but her eyes held a quiet sadness. He walked up beside her, not too close, and asked softly if she was all right. She hesitated, searching for the right words. Then she placed her hand on her chest and whispered her family's name, or what Elias understood to be her family. Her eyes lowered, and she sighed, a soft, heavy sound. Elias felt a gentle ache in his chest. He wanted to say something comforting, but he didn't know what words would be right. Instead, he nodded with understanding. He placed his hand lightly on his own chest and said, "Family," to show he understood what she meant. She looked at him and nodded back. The moment was tender, quiet, and sincere. Over time, they began relying on each other, not out of necessity, but out of mutual respect and growing friendship. The farm became a place of healing both for her and for Elias. She brought new life into the home he had once believed would stay silent forever, and he gave her safety, space, and the chance to breathe again. Neither of them spoke about the future yet. But each day, as they worked side by side, they knew something meaningful was forming between them. A connection built slowly, gently, and honestly, one step at a time. And though they didn't know it yet, the peace they had found together would soon be tested by forces neither of them expected. The peaceful days on the farm continued, and Elias soon realized how much he had grown used to Nalin's presence. She moved quietly through the house and fields, yet there was a warmth in her steps that spread through every corner. Her calm ways softened the edges of his lonely life, and without saying much, she filled spaces that had been empty for far too long. But as much peace as the farm held, the world beyond it was changing. Elias began noticing more travelers passing along distant roads. He saw groups stopping to rest near the hills, some carrying papers, others scanning the landscape with purpose. It was unusual for the area, which normally stayed quiet and undisturbed. Nalin noticed it too. Sometimes she looked uneasy when she spotted riders far away, as if something about them reminded her of the past she was still trying to understand. Elias tried not to worry her, but he also couldn't ignore the strange activity. Whenever he went to fetch water or feed the animals, he would glance at the distant paths, watching for anything unusual. He felt protective of the calm they had built together. He didn't want anything to disturb the fragile trust that had grown between him and Nalin. One morning, Elias needed to go to town for supplies. He told Nalin he would return before sunset and suggested she stay near the house while he was gone. She nodded gently, understanding without argument. She trusted him now, and though she still felt uneasy around strangers, she felt safe on the farm. When Elias reached town, he sensed something was off immediately. A few men stood near the general store talking about scouts sent by officials, people searching for anyone who might have been separated during recent movements of different groups. They spoke casually, unaware of how their words might affect someone who actually understood their meaning. Elias kept quiet, listening only enough to gather information. It seemed the scouts had been asking questions in nearby areas, trying to locate individuals who might have been left behind. Some said it was for paperwork. Others said it was to ensure everyone was accounted for. Although the men didn't mention Nalin directly, Elias felt a quiet heaviness settle into his chest. He knew she would not understand the purpose behind such searches, and he feared that the presence of unfamiliar officials would bring her great worry. He finished buying supplies and left the town quickly, hoping to reach the farm before anything unexpected happened. Along the way, he watched the horizon carefully. Every distant rider made his heart beat a little faster, though he reminded himself to stay calm. When he reached home, he found Nalin standing near the fence, her hands gently resting on the wooden rails. She looked calm, but alert, as if she had sensed something shifting in the air. When she saw Elias returning, she walked toward him with relief in her expression. He greeted her softly, and though he didn't want to worry her, he gently mentioned that there had been more travelers near the town. Nalin listened quietly, her gaze lowering slightly in thought. She seemed to understand more than he expected, even without detailed explanation. That evening, they sat outside as they often did, watching the sky turn shades of gold and rose. Nalin seemed deep in thought. She reached down, picked up a small stone, and rolled it between her fingers. Elias noticed the way her shoulders tightened slightly and understood she must be remembering her family and what she had been through. He didn't press her for words. Instead, he offered calm company. The days that followed were mostly peaceful, but there were small hints of unease. Footprints sometimes appeared near the far edges of the property. A few times, Elias saw riders on the distant hills, not close enough to cause alarm, but near enough to stir caution. Nalin became more observant, watching the landscape with careful eyes. She wasn't frightened, only aware. One afternoon, while Elias checked the barn, Nalin walked toward him with a thoughtful expression. She pointed to the hills where she had seen riders earlier, and then touched her chest lightly, her expression a mixture of concern and calm acceptance. Elias understood she was asking if these people were searching for her. He met her gaze gently and explained in simple words that some people might be looking for anyone who had been lost or separated. But he assured her that she was safe with him. She nodded slowly, appreciating his honesty. She placed her hand on her heart once again, and then pointed softly toward him, as if telling him she trusted him. The gesture touched Elias deeply. He responded with a soft smile, letting her know he would always do his best to protect her peace. One evening, they heard distant voices from far down the road. They weren't loud or aggressive, just unfamiliar. Elias and Nalin stepped outside and saw a small group walking along the path, talking among themselves. They didn't come toward the farm, but their presence confirmed what had been happening. More people were moving through the area, searching, asking questions, checking places they normally ignored. Nalin stood close to Elias, not out of fear, but comforted by his steady presence. Elias spoke softly, telling her that as long as they stayed calm, nothing would disturb the peace of the farm. She nodded, trusting him. Over the next few days, Elias prepared small things quietly. He made sure the farm's boundaries were clear, the doors secure, and the house comfortable. He wasn't preparing for trouble. He simply wanted to make sure Nalan felt safe, no matter what happened. She helped him with the tasks, sensing his focus, even if she didn't fully understand the reasons behind it. Despite the tension in the air, something good also grew between them. Nalan began opening up a little more. She shared small parts of her memories through gestures, drawings, and simple words. She showed him how her people used certain plants for healing, or how they understood animals' behavior by watching their movements. Elias listened with appreciation, learning more from her than he had learned from anyone in years. One morning, while tending to the field, Nalan suddenly paused and pointed at the ground. A trail of fresh footprints led across the dry earth, heading toward the west. They were faint, but recent. Elias studied them quietly, then looked at Nalan, who seemed thoughtful but not afraid. She placed her hand near the print, then stood and looked toward the horizon. Elias understood that whoever had walked near their land had simply passed through, nothing more. Later that afternoon, Elias found Nalan sitting beneath the old tree near the house. She had drawn another set of patterns in the dirt lines connecting circles, symbols forming a story. When he sat beside her, she pointed toward one symbol that looked like a small circle surrounded by lines leading outward. She touched it gently, then looked up at him with warm eyes. Elias understood that she was sharing something about home, perhaps about belonging. He placed his hand gently on the earth beside her drawing, showing he respected its meaning. She smiled softly, comforted. Even though the world around them was shifting, their trust grew stronger each day. Elias realized that whatever uncertainty lay ahead, they were becoming a team, two people from different worlds, who had somehow found common ground in kindness and understanding. What they didn't yet know was that the quiet path behind the hills would soon bring unexpected visitors, ones who would change everything that followed. The morning after the festival brought a calm silence across the desert valley. The sky looked washed clean, soft and pale, as if it had rested too. Samuel stepped out of his small ranch house, feeling a sense of peace he had rarely felt in his life. For the first time in many years, he was not alone. For the first time, the land did not feel empty. Nara was inside, preparing tea the way her people taught her, and the smell drifted through the open windows. It carried a warm and gentle fragrance that made Samuel smile without even realizing it. Nara, meanwhile, moved around the house with light steps. She had grown comfortable in Samuel's home, adding small touches around the rooms. A handmade weaving hung near the doorway, catching the morning light. A small clay bowl she made sat near the table holding dried herbs. Samuel never asked her to stop or explained where she could or could not place things. He simply let her shape the home in ways that felt natural to her, and in doing so, he realized something surprising. Her presence made the place feel more alive, more complete. It no longer looked like a lonely man's dwelling. It looked like a home with stories inside. Life slowly settled into a peaceful rhythm. Samuel woke early, fed the animals, and checked the crops. Nara helped however she could, and though she was still learning the routines of ranch life, she had a natural way with animals. They trusted her almost instantly. Even the stubborn mule, Rusty, allowed her to brush his coat without a fuss, something he rarely allowed anyone else to do. Samuel found this amusing and often teased the mule quietly for ignoring him but obeying her. As the days went by, Samuel and Nara talked more. Their conversations remained gentle and slow, but meaningful. She asked questions about the land, wanting to understand how things grew and changed with the seasons. He asked about her memories, not to pry but to learn what made her smile, what she enjoyed, and what eased her worries. She told him about the colors of the sky she used to watch with her mother, and he told her about the storms that came once every few years, filling the dry riverbeds with roaring water. These shared stories slowly built a bridge between their worlds. Sometimes they sat together after dinner, watching the moonrise. Nara often hummed soft melodies, wordless but warm. Samuel never interrupted her. He only listened, letting the sound settle into his heart like a blanket. He realized how much he had missed simple companionship. His years of silence had felt necessary once, but now he wondered how he had managed to endure so much loneliness. One afternoon, a gentle rain arrived. Rain was rare in the valley, and Nara stepped outside to feel the drops on her hands. She laughed softly, lifting her face toward the sky. Samuel watched her from the doorway, a quiet fondness growing in him. The rain turned the dust into a soft scent that drifted across the ranch. They stood together under the shade of the porch, watching the rain touch the fields. Nara told him that in her tribe, the first rain after a long dry season symbolized renewal, something ending and something beginning. Samuel thought about that for a long while, realizing how much it described his life as well. As the weeks passed, the locals often visited Samuel's ranch, not for trouble, but for help or conversation. They grew to respect Nara, seeing her kindness and peaceful nature. She listened to their stories, offered advice when asked, and shared small handcrafts she made from simple materials. Children loved her and followed her around, asking questions about the patterns she drew in the dirt or the designs she painted on smooth stones. Samuel watched this quietly, feeling a deep pride. One day, an elderly woman from the town named Mrs. Willow brought a basket of warm bread to the ranch. She smiled at Nara and told her that the whole town had noticed how the ranch seemed brighter now. She praised Samuel too, saying he looked healthier and happier than he had in years. Samuel felt shy at the compliment, but he could not deny that it was true. He never said it out loud, but Nara's presence had softened his life. Later that evening, Samuel and Nara sat by the fence, watching the sunset. The sky turned shades of peach, gold, and lavender. Nara traced shapes in the dirt with a small stick. Quiet but thoughtful, she told him she had been thinking about what it meant to belong somewhere. She said that people sometimes believe belonging comes from where a person is born, but she realized it could also come from where their heart feels safe. Samuel listened carefully, understanding the weight of her words. When she asked him if he believed she could find a new kind of belonging on this land, he answered softly that she already had. His reply made her look up, her eyes warm and grateful. Samuel felt a gentle shift in the air, as if something important had just been spoken without being forced. The next morning, Nara asked Samuel to teach her how to plant new seeds in the field. He showed her the right depth for each seed, the spacing, and the way the soil should feel when pressed. She followed his instructions with focus and care, her hands steady. They worked side by side until the sun was high. Samuel noticed that she treated the soil with the same respect she gave everything else. She did not rush. She moved with patience, as though she was speaking to the earth itself. By evening, they sat on the porch with 2 cups of tea. Samuel looked out across the land and realized something surprising. He no longer felt like he was waiting for life to begin again. It had already begun. The ranch was no longer a quiet place filled with memories. It was a living, breathing home, and Nara was at the center of that change. One night, a soft wind passed through the valley. The moon shone bright, lighting the ranch in silver. Nara sat near the window, weaving a small cloth with careful hands. Samuel joined her and watched the pattern appear, line by line. She told him the design represented harmony, 2 lives moving side by side, shaping a shared path without losing themselves. Samuel admired the meaning behind it. After a quiet moment, he gently asked if she believed their lives had reached that kind of harmony. Nara paused, her eyes warm. She nodded slowly and explained that sometimes harmony does not come from planning or expectation. Sometimes it forms naturally when 2 people respect each other, understand each other's silence, and choose kindness every day. Samuel felt a deep contentment settle in his chest. He knew she was right. Their bond had not been forced. It had grown with time, patience, and small acts of trust. The final turning point came during the early days of spring. The fields began to sprout green shoots. Birds returned to the valley, filling the mornings with cheerful sounds. Nara started a small garden near the house, planting herbs and flowers she remembered from her childhood. Samuel helped her place stones around the garden to protect the young plants. Watching her work, he realized that they were both planting something more than crops. They were planting a future. As the sun set behind the hills one evening, Samuel turned to Nara with a calm but sincere expression. He told her that his life had changed because of her quietly, gently, and beautifully. He said he hoped she would stay on the ranch not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she felt it was home. Nara looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. A soft, steady smile that reached her eyes. She said she had already made her decision many weeks ago. This was her home now. This was where she wished to stay. From that day forward, the ranch became a place known not for loneliness, but for kindness, peace, and harmony. Travelers passing by often noticed the welcoming feeling in the air, as if the land itself had softened. Samuel and Nara continued to work side by side, building a life shaped not by the past but by the quiet strength of their bond. Their days were simple, but full. Their hearts were steady, and their home was warm. And so, a farmer who once lived alone for years found a new chapter in life, not through chance, but through respect, kindness, and a connection that grew naturally between two people who chose to care for each other. It became a story the valley would remember, an unexpected partnership that turned a lonely ranch into a place of hope and peace, proving that even in the quietest corners of the world, new beginnings can rise gently, like the first light of dawn.